Alright, here we go. So, this is day 4 of the 31 days of individuation, and I think that the way that I'm approaching this whole thing is from the standpoint of asking a question each day. And I understand the extent to which that can become like all consuming and everything, and like, um, I'm trying to simplify the process as much as possible. But, so, today's question is for the self, of course. what is what is my earliest memory of the self, and where did it come from? The reason why this question is so important is because one of the most interesting things that I've learned in therapy is the the boundary, right? And when you take it in consideration of, like, when you say no for the first time, right? You're establishing your own frame of authenticity. I think a lot of people might not really understand what frame is, so I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more. Um, Frame. Everyone has their own frame. Every single person has their own frame, and that frame is your frame of authenticity. It is your frame in which, within that frame, are your boundaries, your yeses and your nos, your likes, your dislikes, all your wants and needs, this the self, all that stuff. And so something very interesting happens when you give that initial, no, right? Or, like, I want it, or I don't want it, or I think this, or I think that, right? These are all boundaries, right? Because they come from the self. And the reason why I'm asking this question about, you know, the first the earliest memory of self, or of the self, the reason why I'm asking this is because if it came from a conscious standpoint, which is very, 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 I shouldn't even say that. I don't want to say shouldn't, but it's actually beneficial not to say if it came from a conscious standpoint, because um, children are working from a place of feeling, from a place of emotion. They don't have the capacity to recognize logic, right? They're just entirely feeling based, and that's the challenge that comes with that. So, and not only that, but they're also sponges soaking up everything, coming from a very vulnerable state, right? So, when you look at it from the standpoint of what is the earliest memory of self, and where did it come from, the reason I ask this question is because as kids growing up from a very early age, we are bombarded with other people's stuff, right? We're just being projected on constantly. And that's basically forming ourselves for us, unless we are, again, it's very hard to be conscious of self at a very early age. Um, I would argue that not many people are there. More people are kind of like, I mean, there's this matter of survival, right? You're in, like, social survival. You're looking for love, safety, and belonging. And because of that, you are likely to kind of give up the self, or sacrifice the self, right? Um, this is where we learn things like, say, for instance, if we learn that anger is not acceptable in the household, we're going to sacrifice the self. Now, the really interesting thing about this is that that could be that could be the or one of the earliest memories of an individual. And what that does to somebody, I would argue that more often than not, our earliest memories are pretty much things that come from other people, right? Ideas about ourselves that come from other people. Again, we're in social survival, so the likelihood of, you know, someone as a kid, let's say 4 years old, toddler, right, 5 years old, uh, anywhere from there to like 8 years old, right? The self is being established, and if the self, which it's going to happen, if the self is bombarded by all these ideas from other people, it's going to have a very hard time forming in an authentic way. It's likely going to form from a standpoint of what everyone else thinks. Right? Now, one of the most important things here regarding individuation is the autonomy of self. It is literally just one's own capacity to be, do, think, feel, and behave for oneself, right? The challenging thing here is that the person that the child that's in survival, that's looking for love, safety, and belonging, and is learning that anger, healthy anger, by the way, healthy anger, is not an acceptable emotion to display because their parent just can't handle it, so therefore they're being taught to sabotage it or abandon it so that they can gain that love, safety, and belonging, because they're being shown that that way of presenting themselves is not acceptable. So therefore, they are experiencing that, and that is shaping the self. So the reason why this question is so important, the reason why I ask what the earliest memory of the self is and where it came from, is because it's likely that, again, unless there is a profound amount of conscious awareness at that early age, it's likely that it came from somebody else. And that's a very interesting thing, because of course, you know, the self is being established usually by external influence, which is why, you know, the question that I asked yesterday, which was knowing the self, right? Having a definition of the self independent of external influence. The reason why that question to ask is so important is because most of a sense of self for an individual comes external. And this is based on social survival, you know, being brought up in the household. You know, we're seeking love, safety, and belonging. That's just the way that it is. So, you know, where is it going to come from? And if you can identify, excuse me, if you can identify where it comes from and understand why it was formed in that way, and understanding that you were really just looking for love, safety, and belonging, you know, it can give you a better understanding for what's necessary moving forward. Now, here's the challenge with this whole love, safety, and belonging thing, right? A lot of people that go through trauma is a very interesting thing. And what I've learned about trauma is that it's valid, of course, but it more often than not, I would argue never actually. I would just say it never has anything to do with the person who's being traumatized. So, like, say for instance, somebody physically abandons you, right? You are learning through that because of the age that you're at. There's something inherently wrong with you. Like, say for instance, you presented healthy anger in the situation. The person left, right? So that's teaching you not to respond with healthy anger. That is forming the self based around the belief that there's something wrong with you if you present yourself this way, or there's just something inherently wrong with you. You are inherently defective. So it's very interesting how, when you look at it from the standpoint of, okay, so the self was formed or started to be formed in this time. What was happening in this time? What were the influences? What were the determining factors? All those things. And once you can get a clear sense of that, it can help you understand for how things unfolded in your life, in terms of influence, in terms of impact, in terms of direction, in terms of all that stuff. So again, what is the earliest memory of the self, and where did it come from? Now, by the way, let me just make this very clear. When I say self, I am referring to this, right? You have the psyche, and depending on what is experienced within the psyche, you are molded in a very specific way. You're molded in a very specific way. And so, how are you being molded? What is it that's molding you, right? And just go from there, and just dig deeper into that. Go further within the limits of all of that stuff. Let me just end this off with this. There is so many things that happen in childhood that people don't understand. Now let me say this, because this is very important, and I'm pretty sure that I already said this, but I'll say it again. When we are at that point in our childhood, right, when we're just full of feelings, we're full of emotions. That's how we're making sense of everything. Like, say for instance, the feeling of somebody who is being emotionally abandoned. Oh, there must be something wrong with me. 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 There must be something wrong. Over and over and over again, right? Because it's happening over and over and over again. The emotional abandonment is consistent. It's frequent, right? So the thought is based on emotion of the child. So the thought is, all right, well, this person just does not show up for me. There must be something wrong with me, right? But then when you can hit logic, the logic says to you, oh wait, never mind. This person was just really busy, was very overwhelmed by all the things that they were taking on, and therefore, their mind was somewhere else. So it really wasn't me. It had nothing to do with me. So yeah. What is the earliest memory of the self, and where did it come from?